Marco Rubio here. Let's listen to the president after the strikes on Iran.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, for 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. America, thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, there you have it. President Trump, in very brief remarks there, saying that Iran's nuclear program has been completely obliterated. Standing there, addressing the nation, Vice President Vance, Marco Rubio, and also the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks so much for being with us here on this momentous night in American history, and we're going to keep it going. We're also going to be showing you in replay live. We're going to be showing it to you throughout the course of the evening, also bringing on guests, experts, and American history, in the history, the makeup, and the shape, the dynamic of the Middle East. June the 21st, 2025 will be a day that is remembered as a huge, huge moment for what forward to the dynamic of the Middle East, and we'll just have to wait and see. A lot of you are probably asking yourself, now what? I think that's a safe question, an apt question to be asking. Jerusalem. We also know that President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu were on the phone. The United States gave the Israelis a heads up. The Israeli leader. We also got on social media administration what we want to do.
Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous mind of the United States country on earth. History will record that President Trump acted to the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today Trump, I thank you. Well, thank you. The forces of civilization thank
Thursday on the air with strikes on sites in Iran here. So what we want to do right now, because there's a lot of from President Trump here. Let's re-rack it. Let's show it to you in case you might have missed it.
Very much. A short time ago, the U.S. key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight. and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so Andrew Kraft back here. Wanted to replay that for you in case you might have missed it, saying that he and Netanyahu worked as a team, congratulating the Patriots who flew the bombers and the planes, congratulated the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Raisin Kane, and says this could not continue, saying we needed peace, saying also there are many targets left, say he will go after other targets if deals are not reached. And so, yet again, as he has done throughout the course of this entire story, leaving the door open, yet again, to diplomacy. We'll see if that's actionable or operative at all in the wake of this. In the meantime, though, I want to go out to Capitol Hill. We have a live picture there in Washington. It's a little bit after the 10 o'clock hour there in D.C. Chad Pergram reporting this, that it wasn't only the Israelis that got a heads up. A senior White House official saying the White House gave a courtesy heads up to congressional leadership. That's, of course, Senate Majority Leader John Thune. That's, of course, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. And I would imagine the Democrats also in charge in the minority, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and also House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Speaking of Hakeem Jeffries, he put out a statement saying this, that Donald Trump promised to bring peace to the Middle East. He's failed to deliver on that promise. The risk of war is now dramatically increased, and I pray for the safety of our troops in the region who have been put in harm's way. President Trump misled the country about his intentions, failed to seek congressional authorization for the use of military force, and risks American entanglement in a potentially disastrous war in the Middle East. Jeffrey says, first, the Trump administration bears the heavy burden of explaining to the American people why this military action was undertaken. Second, Congress must be fully and immediately briefed in a classified setting. Third, Donald Trump shoulders complete and total responsibility for any adverse consequences that flow from his unilateral military action here. In the meantime, back out live there to the U.S. Capitol. Also, some other news made in that very, very short statement by the president that at 8 o'clock a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning, there will be a press briefing at the Pentagon. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth will be there, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, will be there as well, taking questions from reporters. So, of course, here on Live Now from Fox, we will be showing you that press conference live in its entirety, 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, Sunday morning, 5 a.m. Pacific time. In the meantime, we still have my colleague and friend, of course, national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kemper, still on the horn after so many hours. Hal, you and I have been on the air for so many of these historic moments. I would say that this is one of the most major ones, and it's always a pleasure. And I know you're traveling, and so we thank you for your time. So I got to ask, and you heard me say this question, what now? You heard Hakeem Jeffries in that statement saying that the president needs to reaffirm, explain to the American people why this was needed. Did he do that in that brief statement?
Andrew, I kind of listened to it, and I think he kind of did. I don't think there's any more explanation that needs to be put out there. I think he kind of explained the imperative of why the strikes took place now. He also outlined some things that I was kind of curious about, which was how much communication was there, coordination, if you will. They informed leaders of Congress, which I thought was really good. That was something that the president should do. But I was glad to see that that did happen. It also kind of cleared up any doubts about how well this was coordinated with Israel. It had to be coordinated to a high degree simply because they had to deconflict airspace and a lot of other things. So it wasn't like Israel was going to be caught off guard that we were sending B 2 bombers into Iranian airspace or that we were launching Tomahawk missiles. So that all had to be coordinated regardless in terms of what was happening there. But I think probably one of the biggest things there, and by the way, he did kind of illuminate the battle damage, if you will, in terms of how much destructive force was used. He very basically clarified as if there was any doubt that the Fordo facility was gone, and that the other two sites were also essentially neutralized. And but the other thing was, what is the intent going forward? And on the one hand, he's handed out the olive branch, if you will, saying, look, diplomacy. At the same time, he's raised a sword of Damocles and saying, or, and I think he's made that very clear. And he's also said, not only is a sword of Damocles here, we have a list of targets that we're looking at. In other words, planning, preparation, the forces are in place, everything to follow up on that, which I have to tell you, when you're negotiating on the national security side of the house, it is good to have a very credible threat in hand to say, let's try and work this out, or here's the alternative.
Okay.
And I think we removed all doubt that the U.S. will launch or do something because, well, frankly, we just did it.
Yeah.
So
Hal, I have to say there's kind of two thoughts in my head right now at the same time, maybe President Trump's too, is, he left open the door for diplomacy. He used the word deal again, but said if that is not operative, that there also is the door open for more strikes and more targets from the United States. And so I think a lot of people are asking, our viewers are maybe asking themselves, what next? Will there be more? Is that safe to ask that question? The uncertainty of that right now, it's kind of a wait and see, is it not?
I think it is a wait and see. On the other hand, that's a very legitimate question to ask.
Okay.
And what he has done is he has removed the doubt that the U.S. is prepared to do more than what we just did. The question is, was this a proverbial one and done? Was this going to be our sole thing that we were going to do in that conflict and then walk away? And he's left it open that no, we're ready to do more. Of course, the other part of this is, what will be the Iranian response? Will they start targeting U.S. bases in and around the Arab or Persian Gulf? Will they, start doing some other things around the world using their proxy network or their clandestine network or something like that? What will be the Iranian response to this? And of course, that will help drive what our follow-on actions would be to counter that response and to deal with the nation state of Iran.
Yeah.
So he's kind of left this wide open, but it's rather interesting. I really think, look, how did we get here? He opened up that 60-day window. He said, look, I'm going to have 60 days to negotiate something with Iran. And Iran basically did what Iran always does in these negotiations, which is they kind of played around. They wouldn't make concessions, and they come back with this over-the-top rhetoric and stuff like, we're not going to do anything, and blah, to the point is, I think at one point they were almost asking for Israel to surrender. Is the language almost that strong? It wasn't quite that way, but I was like, really? That's how you're going to negotiate this thing? And I was listening to this, and I was like, we're really not making a lot of progress here. And literally at the end of the 60 days is when Israel started these strikes. And I think that clearly might want to pay a lot of attention to, because it's not just rhetoric.
Okay.
You fail to do it, there will be consequences. And I think that at this point, with President Trump saying what he just said, the consequences side of that is absolutely unambiguously clear to Iran. what will happen going forward.
I see. You know, Hal, all week I've been asking you the question and posing it this way that Israel couldn't strike these sites, these nuclear sites, without our help. And so maybe our viewers are wondering, you know, what did Israel do to assist? Or was this completely unilateral on the United States' part here? Because I was under the impression that if we were going to do this, which we did, that Israel would be involved in some capacity, maybe with intelligence sharing, maybe with actual kinetic assistance here. So I think that's a really interesting question. And I have to get this on with you as well. The misdirection, the diversion, to me, has been so impressive to the point, remember, there was a lot of talk today about this kind of fleet of B-2 bombers, it was reported, flying towards Guam, west. And then you have to think, well, why would they be flying west? Jennifer Griffin reporting this, that the mission followed reports, of course, of 6 B-2s taking off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri around midnight last night. While initial chatter suggested the aircraft were headed west toward Guam, Jennifer Griffin noted the true flight path was likely east, directly toward Iran, and what appears to have been a calculated deception. How much did that throw Iran off guard?
Well, I will say this: the art of war is deception, and misdirection. And this was very well done. It was, they say they're going west. I actually, I was sitting there doing the math. I'm like, you don't really gain much by forward deploying our bombers to Guam. And by the way, I should mention, I've been to Guam a lot. I've been on Anderson Air Force Base. I've seen the hangars where the B-2s are stored. I mean, I'm very familiar with that, but the math just doesn't support it. The only thing you really gain out of it is that if you're going to do a really long range mission out of Guam, you don't get anything in terms of range. But if you're doing a long range mission, you may not have to overfly some places that you otherwise would have to overfly, which is kind of important when you're doing long range bomber missions. But there wasn't a whole lot that was gained from doing that. Now, what we're certainly seeing is they said, hey, we're going to Guam. Now, Guam is known to host B-2s. They have a facility to do so. They have a big hangar and stuff. So that would make sense, to say, okay, they're going to Guam because that is the one place we acknowledge where we could actually put B-2s other than White Air Force Base. So it's, it's like, okay, but it was complete misdirection. They had launched. They can't really cover up the fact they've launched. I mean, literally, you could sit outside the base and watch them launch. So you can't really cover that part up, operationally speaking. But where they're going, once they get in the air, once they get at altitude, they're stealth bombers. You can't see them at night. They can change course and go another direction, which obviously they did. And so this was all part of, operational tactical deception. The other thing, too, which you and I have talked about quite a bit, was the language that was being used. Within 2 weeks. That's what the president said. Within 2 weeks. That's what the White House was saying, within 2 weeks, which the Iranians heard, oh, great, we got 2 weeks. And some were saying, and nobody was wanting to disabuse them of that because nobody was going to say exactly when they're going to do it.
Yeah.
But if you want to believe 2 weeks, you can. So the Iranians, I think, were pretty much caught off guard. They didn't expect this to happen when it happened, which is, if you a big military strike, that's what you want. So, it was very, I got to tell you, I'm with you. This was very well executed, very well done. They achieved what they were trying to achieve, which is they caught the Iranians off guard. And of course, the airspace has to be completely coordinated with the Israelis. So, you knew that was going to have to be a very integrated sort of approach regardless. By the way, I would mention the Israelis also hit the F-14s. All right. So now, look, Iran doesn't have much in the way of fighter aircraft. And those F-14s are really old. They can't do much. But these are B-2 bombers. Their whole thing is stealth. And if an F-14 was to get in the air, was to find some way to get into proximity of a B-2 bomber, there is a potential threat that they could pose. Well, the Israelis took that off. They eliminated that. So there was a coordinated piece with the Israelis on this. It wasn't just us. The Israelis did something in coordination with this.
Okay. Hal Kemper, we're going to leave it at that. We always appreciate your insight, especially on this historic occasion. Hal, thanks so much. Have a good night.
All right. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, back out live there to the White House. I want to put up this map so you can get a sense of the bunker bomb strategy there. So you just heard the president saying that Iran's key nuclear sites were, quote unquote, completely and fully obliterated by U.S. strikes. Trump made the comments you just heard at the White House tonight, hours after announcing the U.S. military had carried out strikes against 3 key nuclear facilities in Iran. The president also warned Tehran against carrying out retaliatory attacks against the U.S., saying Iran has the choice between peace or tragedy. So this is a breaking news update, as you know. Also, Iran's nuclear agency on Sunday, it's Sunday in Iran, confirming attacks took place on its Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz atomic sites, but is insisting that its work will not be stopped. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran issued that statement after President Trump announced the American attack on the facilities here. So there is confirmation from Iran that there was actual targets that were struck by the United States. Their state-run news agency, IRNA, reported early Sunday the attacks targeted the country's Isfahan and Natanz nuclear sites. The IRNA quoted an individual by the name of Akbar Salehi, that's Isfahan's deputy governor in charge of security affairs, saying there had been attacks around the sites, though he did not elaborate. Another official confirmed an attack targeting Iran's underground Fordo nuclear site here. So in the meantime, we do want to bring in more voices to the conversation, including my friend there at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, David Dawood. He's going to join us in just a moment here. All right, like I said here, David Dawood joining me. We are in full breaking news coverage here. We want to thank everyone for watching on this very late Saturday night. David, thanks for joining us on this late Saturday night, but it's a historic occasion, a historic, momentous occasion here. I'm going to ask a simplistic question that may sound somewhat glib and simplistic to viewers. Has the United States ever struck targets inside Iran? Have we ever used military force inside the country of Iran?
No, not to this extent. There was Operation Eagle Claw, which was meant to rescue American hostages that were held by affiliates of the government of Iran after the revolution. That unfortunately failed. The hostages were not rescued. They were released upon the President Reagan taking office. But this is unprecedented for the United States to have struck Iran at all internally and definitely in this manner.
So, David, I have to ask this, and maybe this is unanswerable right now. I mean, President Trump did say Iran's nuclear program is completely obliterated after tonight here. How will we know that? Will we have, people on the ground who can confirm that? Yes, the president is saying that here, but as far as Iran's nuclear program, where does it stand right now? What phase is it in? Is it completely decimated, like the president says, or is it too early to know?
Well, right now I'd say it's too early to know. The Iranians themselves are saying that the fissile material was moved out of the facilities prior to the strikes, or much earlier than the strikes they were claiming. Now, look, is that true? Is that a face-saving claim so they can walk down the de-escalatory ladder? Right now, these strikes put them in a position where they may have to respond in some fashion. They've been threatening to attack U.S. assets and U.S. personnel for some time if any strike by the United States occurred in Iran. Now it's time for them to put their figurative money where their mouth is, and they may not want to do that because there will be consequences. As President Trump said, you attack us, we're going to keep attacking back. So it may be that this is their way, claiming that the fissile material was moved to be able to walk this back and not follow through on these threats. It may be true. I think time will tell more so than anything. We have the intelligence that the Israelis were able to gather on location of these sites, nuclear scientists. I mean, obviously, that's going to be put into play to figure out what the state of Iran's nuclear weapons program, its nuclear program period, but particularly its nuclear weapons program is after these strikes. But that may take some time to make that full assessment.
I mean, we have a live picture there over Jerusalem as the sun comes up right now. And obviously, I don't have to say this, I'm going to reiterate it, but we know when Israel launched the preemptive strikes last Thursday, Iran retaliated in kind, and it's been this tit for tat ever since. Now, the dynamic of whatever Iran does in retaliation will look different. We have U.S. assets in the region in the form of materiel, in the form of troops, also American citizens in the region, many of whom are being evacuated from Israel right now. If you're watching this right now from the United States, is it right to be concerned how Iran will retaliate? We don't know. Can they even? And what does that look like?
Again, there are a lot of question marks here. So the Israelis have been engaged in now, I think it's a 10-day campaign in Iran to degrade not just the nuclear weapons program, but they've also been striking the ballistic missiles program and other military assets. I think there was a strike on the Iranian Navy yesterday as well. So there's this degradation of Iran's ability to retaliate directly. Now, if we look at the ballistic missiles, in terms of their attacks on Israel, they've been decreasing in the quantity of barrages overall and the quantity of missiles within each barrage. I think last night or yesterday, there was one missile barrage of 5 missiles each. It's the lowest that's happened since the onset of the war. Now, simultaneously, the Israelis are saying that they've destroyed most of Iran's ballistic missile launchers. But this doesn't mean that Iran's out of assets. Now, could it suggest that Iran's running out of ballistic missiles? That's one explanation. The other explanation is that the Iranians are holding back assets in anticipation of precisely what happened now, that the United States would get involved in this conflict and they'd have to respond to the United States, which could, anytime you have any military engagement, there's the possibility that this could precipitate a much larger, much more protracted conflict between Iran and the United States. So is Iran holding assets in reserve? This is something that, they've been kind of missing from the scene, but Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, the primary proxy, it's taken a beating, but anyone who says that Hezbollah is down for the count is speaking prematurely. So has Iran been holding this in reserve until such a moment? There's also the Houthis, the Iraqi militias. The Iranians are also masters at clandestine operations abroad and in the region if they want to target U.S. personnel. So they have options that are beyond military strikes or direct military strikes through their ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. There are other assets that they could use and activate to threaten the United States, maybe not directly our homeland. They might not want to go that far at this moment, but definitely our assets in the region or in Europe.
That is the question, especially from some critics of this action, including from some members of the president's own party, that this will turn into yet another foreign entanglement, that this will be protracted. But then I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Trump's first term, where he struck targets in Syria. That was a one-off. Do you see similarities to that here tonight?
Well, I think there's an even more appropriate analogy, the strike on Qasem Soleimani in January of 2020, where Trump took the move and then he went up and said, similar to what he said today, both on Truth Social and in his statement, that we're done. Now's the time for peace. And Iran could, there are reports that the United States had informed Iran that there's no intention on the part of the United States to engage in regime change in Iran, that these strikes will be a one-off, that they will target these facilities, and that'll be it for us. Now, Iran obviously has to engage in some face-saving measure. This is more, as much for them to restore deterrence to the extent that they can restore deterrence after this, as it is to show that their base, and this is the real threat to the regime, that they are still capable of responding in kind, of retaliating in kind, that they're not just going to take this quietly. But it could just end up at that, where they engage in a face-saving measure that's able to shore up their image domestically, and President Trump doesn't have to continue down this escalatory ladder with the Iranians. That is a possibility.
So, David, a lot has been said about Israel's role in all of this, that they are really doing the dirty work on behalf of Western civilization, if you want to characterize it as follows. Do you envision a scenario where, talking about Iran's retaliation to this tonight, that they would also bear the brunt of whatever Iran does, Israel, that they will suffer the slings and arrows of what we have done in still the skies of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, and the like here? Do you think that could happen?
It's very much a possibility. The Home Front Command, just prior to President Trump speaking, had issued updated instructions to, they loosened requirements in the past couple of days because Iran's ballistic missiles attacks had become less frequent. Like I said, fewer missiles per barrage. The Israelis were able to contend with them better, and now they've raised those alerts again. So I think the Israelis are expecting some kind of retaliation. And look, let's be honest here. The Israelis fired the first blows in this. They paved the way today. There were reports today that the reason the B-2 bombers were able to make it into Iran safely and out was because the Israelis were destroying Iranian assets along the way that could have impeded the movement of these B-2 bombers. So the Iranians are aware that the Israelis are involved and that they contributed to the strike. So there very well could be a retaliation against Israel.
Okay, so some more kind of philosophical questions right now. I'm not even sure if it's time for that because this is still a breaking news story. But you and I talk about the 30,000-foot view from this. Um, is it naive to say that after tonight, Iran will no longer have a nuclear program? Because I was asking guests like yourself all week, will it take only regime change for Iran to give up their nuclear program here or not? I mean, clearly President Trump says their program's no more. After tonight, the Ayatollah is still alive, still in charge. So is the regime change question right now not the question we should be asking, or premature? Because you have to separate the two. Who's in charge of Iran and their nuclear program?
Look, again, I think it may be too soon to tell. What the Iranians are saying is that you can destroy these facilities, you can destroy the centrifuges, but you can't destroy the know-how. What the Israelis are proving is that they can destroy the know-how. They've been engaged in an assassination campaign against Iran's top nuclear scientists. So if this regime survives and if this regime is able to rebuild and have a pathway to rebuilding, which as things stand, right, they haven't activated their proxies haven't been destroyed, the regime still has an ability to walk this back in a way that it survives. Their ideology hasn't changed. Their tactics may change, where their emphasis may change, but their ideology will not change. And that ideology remains this antipathy towards the West, this desire to challenge Western civilization, and at its forefront, the United States. Does that mean that they'll go back to rebuilding a nuclear weapons program immediately? Again, I think if enough Iranian nuclear scientists have been killed, that won't be as easy as just let's rebuild the buildings and restart the centrifuges. So it'll have to take, again, redeveloping the know-how, and that could take a long period of time. I do think that the only way this ends, the only way that Iran's threat to the region, both conventional and from weapons of mass destruction, ends, is with a change of this regime.
Okay.
It doesn't seem on the table now, but that does not mean that the nuclear weapons program will return in the immediate term, even if this regime survives.
Because some of the critics of this action tonight are saying and have said along the last week that they'll just restart it eventually. It's only a matter of time. They can regroup. So we'll just have to your point, wait and see. Let's talk about on the ground in Iran. We're anticipating, we're waiting to see if we see it. Any images or videos of the strikes themselves or the aftermath. So for our viewers who are keenly aware of that, we're looking for it. Haven't found it just yet. Were there people, everyday Iranians, who go to work at these sites each and every day? Were they there during the strikes, or were they evacuated? Because something else that I've been discussing with experts like yourself, bombing with 6 bunker busters, those are 30,000-pound bombs each, nuclear sites, that dredges up a lot of radioactive material in the air, in the ground, in the wake of the explosions here. So are you looking at a potential kind of nuclear fallout from just the bombing of these sites in the air in Iran, on the ground in Iran? Do you think that's happening right now?
From what we're hearing, it's not happening now, and there's no immediate reports on civilian casualties or casualties among those who are working at the facilities. But as far as we can tell, there's, again, this is too soon to tell, but the Iranians aren't reporting any nuclear fallout. I will say about your earlier comment about the critics of the strike, look, perhaps this only delays Iran by a few years and that they will regroup eventually. But I think there's a benefit to distancing Iran as much as possible from possession of a nuclear weapon. This is a very dangerous regime. Prime Minister Netanyahu likes to call it the world's most dangerous regime. I think that's a question up for debate whether it is or it isn't, but it is a dangerous regime. It is a regime with a dangerous ideology. And we've seen the havoc that Iran can wreak without a nuclear weapon. Imagine what it could do if all of its militias and all of its regional destabilization had a nuclear umbrella behind it. So distancing this regime as much as possible from a weapon, even if it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, however much it is, that is a net benefit to the United States. It's a net benefit to Israel. It's a net benefit to the international community. I don't know what if what these critics have as an alternative. If Iran was indeed weeks or months away from a nuclear weapon, is it not better? I pose the question back to them: is it not better than to have them mere weeks and months away from a nuclear weapon, to have them 5 or 10 years away from a nuclear weapon?
Okay, so David, you just made the case to the critics that I have been kind of following all throughout the last 2 weeks here. What if they don't buy those arguments? What is the alternative to your point? Because the arguments of the critics are the United States does not need to enter into another foreign entanglement, a la the Iraq War, that this is not in U.S. national security interests. Of course, the president has said, no, it is. And he is kind of not really listening to some of those voices, even coming from within his own party here. So I think you expertly kind of made the case. But if one of those critics was on with us right now, I mean, how would you respond? What would your retort be to them?
I would say they don't understand the nature of the Iranian regime. Yes, they view this in kind of an immediate term threat assessment, where in the more immediate term, yes, the Iranians are a bigger threat to the state of Israel. Israel is the only country that Iran has slated for destruction. But at the same time, let's understand the reason for Iran's enmity towards Israel. It's not, I often like to say it's not that they hate us, the United States, because we support Israel. They hate Israel because it's an extension of the United States. And don't listen to David Daoud saying this. Listen to Hezbollah, which is an Iranian asset, saying this. I'm an expert on Hezbollah. This is what I know best. They keep calling Israel a forward military base and a tool of the United States. The narrative, even on the 2006 Israel Hezbollah war, is that Israel did not want to enter that war at the time, and the United States pushed a reluctant Israel to enter that war in order to create a new Middle East. The way they view the world is that the United States is, to quote Hezbollah, the head of corruption, the font of corruption, and everything flows from that, including Israel's military might. And the way that the Iranian regime views itself is that it is in this clash of civilizations, this Huntingtonian clash of civilizations with the West, which is primarily led by the United States. And it is their job, in order to push their view, their worldview, to weaken us in any way, shape, or form. So maybe they're not threatening us directly now, in the sense that the way they're ballistic missiles falling on Israel. But there is a broader threat, and there's a broader attempt by the Iranian regime and like-minded regimes to weaken the United States. And in doing so, that will threaten our way of life here in the United States. Again, it doesn't have to happen in a year or two, but over the long run, that is their intention. So setting this regime back, that's a separate question. I think mixing this up with an Iraq situation, you don't necessarily have to invade Iran and destroy the regime and engage in democracy building in order to prevent this regime from continuing to constitute a threat both to its surroundings and, in the broader sense, to the United States and its interests.
David, lastly, though, what about the Iranian people? There's been this, some would call a kind of logical fallacy and maybe naivete going on, that in the wake of all of this, there would be this kind of organic, coming up of the Iranian people, that they would, pursue their self-determination now that, Israel has somewhat liberated them from the jackboot of the theocratic mullahs here. You haven't seen that. Are people naive to the fact that that's actually going to happen? What does your everyday Iranian think about what's going on? Do they like the regime? Do they want the regime gone? Is this positive, good news of what the United States did today, or no?
Look, I think it's a complicated question. Look, when we've spoken about this, when it comes to Lebanon, I've always said it's hard to just say what the Lebanese streets' opinion is. And I would say, I'm not an expert on Iran. I don't follow Iran very closely, or as closely as I do Lebanon. But I will say every side in the discussion over whether the Iranian regime has popular support or not has an interest in playing up their side. So the Iranian opposition to the regime has an interest in saying that we are the majority, we represent the Iranian people and the will of the Iranian people, and so does the Iranian regime. It's hard to tell on the ground, right? This is not a democracy where you can go in and get honest opinions from people. What we have not seen, however, maybe we've seen some smatterings, on social media of people coming out and chanting against the regime. We've also seen demonstrations and people spontaneously speaking on behalf of the regime. So it's a very complicated image. What we have not seen, however, this military operation is still, we're still in the middle of this. So it's not done yet. So maybe it is too soon to speak. Maybe I am speaking prematurely. But what we have not seen now, what we can say for certain, is tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Iranians go out into the street, take this opportunity to go out into the street and finish off what's left of the regime. Is that because, again, there's an ongoing military operation and they're waiting for that to be done? Is that because the psyche of fear in which this Iranian regime has held the Iranian people? I mean, if you think about protest after protest going back to 2009 and even earlier,
Yeah.
where people have protested this regime's actions. The regime has gotten more proficient at putting down these protests with the utmost brutality. So have you, as the Iranian people, or have these Iranians who oppose the regime lost the hope to come out and protest the regime? It's unclear. Again, I can't speak to the nitty gritty of this.
Sure.
All I can say is that each side has the interest now in playing up their respective support.
All right. David Dawood, we're going to have to leave it at that. Always good to see you. Your insight is extremely valuable. We'll definitely be chatting soon, I would imagine. Thanks so much, David. Have a good night.
My pleasure.
Okay, in the meantime here, we're going to keep this going. We're going all night in our continuing coverage of what is very historic. I asked that question right off the top to David. Has the United States ever struck targets militarily inside the country of Iran? And no, that was the answer there. So in the meantime, remember, we're on the lookout for some of these visual aids, videos, photos inside Iran of the explosions themselves. Haven't seen them yet, confirmed. There's a lot kind of percolating out there on social media. We'll wait to confirm some of those images and media and bring those to you so you can see for yourselves the aftermath of some of these strikes inside of Iran at these 3 nuclear enrichment facilities. Let's put up the map yet again as we continue to bring in more expert analysis, reporters, guests. On deck is my friend and colleague at the Washington Examiner, Michael Brest. He covers the Pentagon each and every day. So there you can see. And I want to just read from President Trump's initial post on Truth Social, telling the world this is what the United States did. He said, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. All planes are now outside of Iran airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter." And I believe he posted yet again on Truth Social moments ago saying this: "Any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. Thank you, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States." And I think it's a safe question. Probably a lot of you have. What will Iran do in response? What will that even look like? Also, we're getting kind of a inside view into the Situation Room. The White House putting out new photos of the moments that these strikes were ongoing as the president's national security team were witnessing it in the room itself. This is from the White House. Take a look at some of these photos there. You see the vice president in the foreground, of course, Secretary of State Rubio. So the White House just releasing these. You also see Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Kane, also White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, also Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. So this is courtesy of the White House. These are extremely new images from the Situation Room. In the background there, Dan Scavino, White House Communications Director, and President Trump seated there at the head of the table in the Make America Great Again hat, the red hat, the iconic red hat. So in the meantime, remember, at 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, that's 5 a.m. Pacific time, at the Pentagon, there will be a press briefing from Secretary Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I would imagine that my friend and colleague, Mike Brest there at the Washington Examiner, will be on hand for that. We're going to bring him into the conversation momentarily here. Take a look at this live picture there at the White House. So in the meantime, like I said, Mike Brest, he is on standby. He joins me. Mike, so good of you to be with us. I know it's late there in Washington. I would imagine, like I said, you're going to be at the press conference very early tomorrow morning, so we'll keep this short. What question would you ask, will you ask, if you get the chance, to Secretary Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
So I think on a very basic level, there are questions that need answering in terms of confirmation, what troops were involved in the mission, what exactly were their targets. We're still a little early in terms of battle damage assessments, but any initial reads on just sort of how successful the mission was. And then to look forward, a question that I'm wondering is how exactly have they gone about preparing U.S. bases in the region should they come under attack from Iran in retaliation. And so I think when we look ahead, that has to be one of the major sort of viewpoints that we have to look at and sort of see exactly how this plays out. A lot of it will be sort of determined based on Iran's response at this point.
So, Mike, I have to ask, let's kind of walk our viewers back. Earlier in the day, there was so much reporting about the B-2 bombers, 6 of them that were flying, it was reported, to the west toward Guam. Jennifer Griffin, our colleague at Fox, who reports alongside you at the Pentagon, said this, that the true flight path was likely east directly toward Iran and what appears to have been a calculated deception. I'm not a military expert by any means. A B-2 plane, a B-2 jet, what is it? What is its payload? Obviously, a very large payload in order to carry a 30,000-pound bomb. Those bunker buster bombs, 30,000 pounds each. We used 6 of them. Also, we use multiple Tomahawk missiles here. If you could, walk us through the materiel that was used.
So, as you mentioned, the B-2 bombers are housed at a military base in Missouri. So that's where they took off from. As Jen Griffin reported, it seems like all the reporting we saw about some of the B-2s going west was actually somewhat of a deception. It shouldn't be hard, or that shouldn't be too difficult to think through or prove, considering the Pentagon announced earlier in the week that they had forward positioned a refueler aircraft in Europe. And so the refueler aircraft allow for the B-2 bomber to be refueled while in the air. So there is a possibility that these B-2s went right from Missouri to the Middle East and back, having to be refueled in the air several times, but that is a possibility. And then, as you mentioned, these bombers carry, or in this instance, we've been told carried the 30,000. It's called the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. It's one of the largest non-nuclear weapons the U.S. has, and it's specifically designed to hit a hardened underground target. So that's exactly why they were using it, to hit the nuclear facilities in Iran that were underground.
So, Mike, you remember that some of the debate throughout the last week was, especially in U.S. defense circles, even within the White House, it was reported that Trump and others, they weren't so sure that the bunker buster bombs could do the job. Has that been disabused as of tonight, according to the president? The president is saying that nuclear weapons, the nuclear program rather of Iran, has been completely obliterated. So all the worry that the bunker busters might not do the job, was that much ado about nothing, or no?
Well, so I think it's a little too early to tell exactly, because the president sort of gave an overall assessment of the operation, but we don't know any of the specifics. We haven't seen or heard about the destruction that was actually caused. And so I think it's a little too early. But part of the reason there was this concern or this mystery about whether or not using these bombs would be successful is because the U.S. Air Force has never gone on record saying they've ever used it before. So the fact that this is the first time they've actually dropped the bomb is in and of itself a new experience for the military. So they're probably still
Mike,
evaluating the success.
Can you reiterate that point, Mike? Can you reiterate that point? I think that's very significant. You just said the United States military has never publicly acknowledged the use of these bunker buster bombs until today.
Yes, exactly. And so it's really hard to see even how the U.S. would be able to know the success of it this soon after.
Okay.
And so I'm sure in the days and weeks ahead, and I'm sure the Secretary and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will probably give some level of an update tomorrow, but it could be several days, if not a couple of weeks, before we get a full understanding of how successful these massive ordnance penetrator bombs were. And I'm sure a lot of that information will be classified, and we'll find out from the unclassified details that emerge.
All right, let's talk about what other questions you might ask. Of course, we're going to be showing the press conference in full tomorrow live. What else do you want to know? What does Secretary Hegseth and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs need to first explain, how they did this, how it was carried out, how it was executed, the help. What else do you want to know?
I think there are a lot of questions in terms of how long has this been in the planning? Uh, there's been some disagreement about the assessment on how close Iran was to actually getting a nuclear weapon. I think these are questions that the Pentagon should discuss, in part because they haven't been briefing reporters or haven't held a briefing in the last week since this war got underway. So there are a lot of questions. I would love to ask questions about uh, the U.S.'s involvement in the defense of Israel. We heard from sources within the building that they were involved in intercepting Israeli missiles or Iranian missiles heading for Israel, excuse me, but we don't know how many. We don't know uh, how successful the U.S. was in their efforts. And so there's a lot that the Pentagon will be asked about because they haven't briefed since Israel and Iran went to war a week and a half ago now.
Now, they haven't only just not briefed since then. From what I understand, there's only been, because we would air it in its entirety here on Live Now, there's only been one full Pentagon press briefing in the briefing room since President Trump took office a second time in January. Do I have that right?
That is correct. So the first briefing was right after the Houthi bombing campaign began a couple months ago. And so that was with the head of, or the chief spokesman of the Pentagon, Sean Parnell. Secretary Hegseth has not been in the Pentagon briefing room to take questions from reporters, so this will actually be our first time getting the opportunity to ask him some questions.
Okay, I just wanted to note that point because obviously we get near daily White House press briefings, we get near daily State Department briefings. The Pentagon is, somewhat different, and you correct me if I'm wrong here. You cover the Pentagon each and every day. That is unusual and unorthodox, compared with previous presidential administrations, right?
It is. The current administration has taken a very different tact as it relates to how it tries to relay information to the American people.
Okay, Mike, always glad to have you on. I know it's late there in Washington, and I'm sure we'll be speaking in the next couple of days. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, we are approaching a new hour. It's almost 8 o'clock here on the West Coast, almost 11 p.m. there in Washington. And so at the top of the hour, we're going to take the opportunity to let you listen to the very brief statement President Trump made there in the White House. Standing behind him, of course, was the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and also the Secretary of Defense. After that, in addition, we also have a video message from the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, thanking the Trump administration. We're also getting more and more reaction from world leaders as well on social media, including from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. We'll have that for you. We're also on the lookout for more and more of these statements from world leaders. We've gotten a lot of congressional reaction. We'll kind of go through that as well here from the relevant committees. Remember, it was reported, courtesy of our colleague Chad Pergram there on Capitol Hill, that the Trump White House did give congressional leaders a heads up on this, and also gave Israel a heads up on this too. So stay tuned. Like I said, I'm Andrew Kraft. We are going throughout the evening nonstop here with continuing coverage of a historic first, June 21st. Remember this day, 2025, the United States striking targets inside Iran militarily for the first time, 8 o'clock here on the dot. In the meantime, though, like I said, let's re-rack it for you in case you haven't seen it just yet. This was the statement from President Trump now about an hour ago.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, that was the brief message there from President Trump at the White House.
All right, folks. There's a lot of traffic that's ongoing with this right now, and they're going to repeat the message a few times. I'll bring it back up as needed if somebody needs to get caught up, but we'll listen to Netanyahu before I get too busy with it, just in case some people didn't hear it.
With the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
Okay, there, Bibi Netanyahu with that message. We're also.
So, for those of you that are already aware, the U.S. conducted some airstrikes in Iran targeting some key nuclear facilities. There is still early on. They haven't done a full assessment on how much damage. There has been some confirmation out of Iran itself to acknowledge that they were struck with military munitions. And this conversation about Iran, the Middle East, and however the narrative has been framed has still just brought more and more context to the relationship between the United States and Israel. A lot of people say that Israel is the proxy of the United States, and some people think that the United States is the proxy of Israel politically. And all of those conversations are on the table now because of the actual military action that's bringing forth this discussion. What does this mean going forward? We don't know. A lot of this has been brewing over the years, like when they brought up Soleimani was targeted in, I think he was targeted in Iraq by U.S. forces, U.S. munitions when Trump was last in office. So you have to look at these things. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. This is years of tension with strategy that's involved for reasons that most Americans probably can't see. And even for the people that are cleared, that are in the community, that understand military intelligence, that follow foreign policy and conflict, they have a different aspect of what's taking place. So what are we here to wait for at this point? We don't know just yet. It's still new. No assessments can be made, but this is a great time to go back and examine how deep is the policy and connection between Israel and the United States that took place long before we were even born, long before our parents was born, long before any of this modern conflict that we're seeing right now in our era was even brought to fruition. And keep in mind, the Israeli culture is older than the United States. So that is an undertone in itself. So when you're thinking about these conflicts and the amount of sophistication between the governments and how they communicate with each other and how they resolve their problems and what they care about, there's a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration because there's so much that's unknown and people will fill in the blanks with fear instead of history. There's enough information that's out here for you to be able to make an assessment about, how deep this rabbit hole actually goes. These are very, very key times. I'm sure like any other era where there was a lot of military conflict and people being in key positions to have an opinion about it. But this is happening so fast and with so much information being transferred at any given time, even the fact that we can go live and then talk about this, you really got to understand that this is a very small piece to the foreign relationships that have taken place. A lot of investors, a lot of people with a lot of assets and money and equity tied up into Israel and the opposition of other countries. The relationships between like Iran and Iraq. There's some people that believe that the Iran-Iraq war was the start of World War III a long time ago. And for those of you who don't know, Iran and Iraq fought a war from 1980 to 88, and all it resulted from it was a bunch of people, being outed, being deleted rather. There was no definitive outcome of who actually won. Then you take that into consideration, and then in 1953, where the U.S. is on record as having a hand in the coup that got the Shah out of Iran. So Iran's had a negative perception or a bad taste in his mouth, rather, from U.S. intermingling with geopolitical situations like this, especially in the region. And all of those countries that are over there all have a problem with Israel for a lot of different reasons. So you're going to see a lot of conflicts in discussion keep resurfacing, and it's just old unresolved political skirmishes. no different than a lot of the domestic issues that people talk about on a regular basis here domestically. Just the same as the same energy and fervor that goes along with the illegal immigrant crisis. The many epidemics in the domestic are considered to be micro problems that reflect the larger macro situation in terms of how the U.S. goes about executing foreign or domestic policy. Now, you're not going to be able to please everybody, obviously. And then we got a great point on legacy. So back in October 2024, there was BRICS. BRICS was an economic alliance between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They started off with 5 countries, and then they expanded, and Iran came into the mix too. So you got a lot of regional players that have, put their money and resources together for and logistics purposes. So it's going to be interesting to see how the other members of BRICS have any type of response. Now it's called BRICS Plus. So it's going to be interesting to see if the other partners in that currency exchange going to have any equity in what the U.S. is doing. This is not going to just be U.S. and Iran sitting down at the table, or U.S., Israel, and Iran. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what China's opinion is. India's involved, and India and Pakistan don't get along. Afghanistan's next door to Pakistan. All of these countries are lined up, So I'm gonna go check some stuff on Al Jazeera and check some other media sources to see what the reaction is in the region, and then we'll probably catch back up when it comes down to it. But I'll let this play again so you guys can get caught up. I don't want you guys to miss any information.
Isfahan is where Iran also manufactured centrifuges. So could it be that Isfahan was actually more important than Fordow?
So it appears that what was happening in Isfahan was that you were having
see
the
Iraq on the
enrichment
west,
done
Afghanistan
at
in the east.
secret facility in Fordo, where the most advanced centrifuges were developed or were running. And then that material was taken out of Fordo and being stored in
over
Isfahan.
here.
So you have production in Fordo, you have storage and maintenance and possibly conversion to, putting onto a warhead, that type of development happening in Isfahan. So 2 different facilities doing 2 different things. Now, whether or not you can destroy Isfahan, one can with the proper munitions, basically cripple access to it. So maybe the facility still stands, maybe the tunnels, maybe bunkers, maybe a huge size, depots, maybe halls, whatever facilities are still intact, but access to them, which requires, a tunnel entrance above ground, those can be crippled. Those can be eliminated or denied or compromised. You can re-access them, you can rebuild them, but there'll be satellites watching all of this happen to see if there's any more activity there. So again, we don't know for certain until we have either visual satellite intelligence or on the ground human intelligence verifying one way or the other. This is all speculation.
So obviously, within 2 weeks didn't mean a full 2 weeks. It meant within 2 days. So I thought that was somewhat telling and prescient, since we were talking about, and kind of parsing the language of, what did the president mean saying he needed 2 weeks' time to think. Remember, the Wall Street Journal earlier this week had reported that he had already made up his mind, and he was off to Bedminster, New Jersey yesterday, came back to the Situation Room just today, and we have some pictures put out by the White House here. Benjamin, just lastly, I wanted to ask, was Iran caught off guard? Or did they know or think that this was coming? Were they completely surprised?
Nothing indicated that they were prepared for this. We didn't see any massive movements. We didn't, at least nothing we were able to detect. There's no intelligence that came out that said Iran was prepping for this. And I think very much they were caught off guard. I think they were willing to accept that maybe not 2 weeks, but it definitely would last for longer than 2 days. We know that there are attempts at diplomacy with the Europeans, and reports came out that even Turkey had offered to help. Maybe they were waiting to see where that was going to go. It was going to be revisited. So I think that this very quick 48 hours came as a shock to them.
All right, Benjamin Rabb there, as always. Can't thank you enough. I guess I have to ask this. I know I always say lastly, but I always think of another question. What are you looking for going into the week now? Will there be retaliation? That's what I'm looking for. And I would imagine Americans are probably asking themselves the same thing here. It was also reported in Axios yesterday, I believe, that there was some type of brokering, at least attempted, with Turkey as an intermediary between the United States and Iran. It was reported President Trump was thinking that he wanted to meet directly with Iranian officials, but the Ayatollah could not be reached. Erdogan of Turkey was kind of brokering all of this. And then, all for naught, it didn't go anywhere here. Can you envision some type of meeting or summit between U.S. officials, high ranking, not Steve Witkoff, but the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, President himself, with Iranian officials? Is that on the table, you think, or no, after this?
So if it's one thing that officials of any high rank, especially president or cabinet level secretary, doesn't want to do is he or she doesn't want to engage in a meeting or a summit where they know ahead of time a deal is unlikely. It looks bad for them. And so in this instance, we know where Iran's red lines were. They haven't signaled otherwise. Their red lines have been they insist on maintaining a peaceful enrichment program, and that they were not going to compromise on unless they indicated through back channels they were willing to yield on that. And to do so would be a 180, and they'd have to account for that with their own public. It's difficult to see why or how those high-level officials would meet. Now, it's tempting, and I think the offer from the president was genuine, but I'm not sure if at the end of the day it would have materialized for other reasons, and that being one of them. I simply don't see a deal under the conditions that each side wanted happening.
All right, Benjamin Rad, always good to see you, and thank you so much for providing such great insight, especially this late at night. Benjamin, we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, I think it's safe to kind of reset, catch our breath as we continue this breaking news coverage. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to my colleague, Austin Westfall. He was on when it happened, and we're continuing right through of this momentous, historic occasion there, not only here, stateside, but also in the Middle East here. We have live pictures there on Capitol Hill, also at the White House as well. We've heard from President Trump multiple times. They have issued photos in the Situation Room of when this all was going down. And if we could put up the most recent post on Truth Social, in case you haven't seen it just yet, I want to read it to you. So this is what the president says, that any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. He says, thank you, Donald Trump, President of the United States. So, like I said, we're going to be bringing in more and more guests.
Did he thank himself?
To help us make sense of this moment. We're also going to be garnering reaction from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Let's go back to Capitol Hill. There are some critics of this move coming from Democrats who have said that the president needed congressional authorization.
Trump thanked himself in third person?
Under the War Powers Resolution, i.e. a vote of Congress to authorize these strikes. That did not happen, of course, you know that. So we'll be highlighting some of those. So like I said, we do want to bring into the conversation right now folks there at the Atlantic Council, including Jonathan Panikoff. He joins me. Jonathan, thanks for being with us. I know it's very late, but we have to get to so many of my questions. I know you have a lot of questions here. Jonathan, I think it's safe to say, maybe let's take stock of what has transpired over the last 12 months in the Middle East. I'm thinking of last July, late July, when Ismail Haniyeh went to Tehran for the funeral of the previous Iranian president, and he was assassinated there in Tehran at the guest house. Yep. And then fast forward to last fall, when Israel was taking out Hezbollah targets left and right, including the leader, the cleric Hassan Nasrallah, and lest we forget also the extraordinary pager and walkie-talkie operation, really decimating Hezbollah and its ranks. They've taken the fight to the Houthis throughout the course of this since what, October 8th, 2023. And then, of course, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria in December. And then in the middle of all of that, you had Iran strike Israel twice. That had never happened before. And now we have something that has never happened before either. The United States striking targets kinetically, militarily inside of Iran. It's dizzying when you put it all together, when you stack it all up. I've probably left so much out. But it's safe to say the Middle East has transformed in all of that time, and especially tonight. Would you agree, Jonathan?
Thanks for having me this evening. Yes, I absolutely would agree. I think the way you contextualized it is actually an incredibly important point. This war did not start, frankly, in October of last year when you had Israel and Iran
Here we go.
really engage in the second of kinetic engagements, nor did it start in April. It didn't start with Hezbollah. It really started October 7th. And there's a direct line of everything that happened from Hamas's terrorist attack October 7th, 2023 until today. I think sometimes it's not quite clear where these things are going to go. And I think what you're going to see is, frankly, we don't know right now how the Middle East is going to be changed, but it's going to be changed. It's going to depend on Iran's response here. One pathway is a relatively small response, a narrow response that Iran gets to stand up and say, look, it responded. It can respond to hardliners and those supporting the regime saying we stood up for Iran, stood against the U.S., but intending not to really do significant harm or damage. And maybe all of this now ends without an Iranian nuclear program that opens up great opportunities in the region. The second possibility, of course, is incredibly dangerous because it's that Iran's regime feels like it's really under threat for its own survival and says, we're going to have to go for broke almost and engage all the proxies it has remaining, weaken though they are, its capabilities it has remaining, and heavily escalates the situation. The U.S. has to respond. And now we're talking about a longer term regional conflict that nobody quite knows where it's going to end. We're going to see in the coming days which of these pathways plays out.
Yeah, aside from the military response to all of this, and it was lauded and touted by President Trump in his statement, how do you think the Trump administration, his Defense Department, his State Department, and his National Security Council handled all of this? What grade would you give them? And I just want to kind of cite something I just saw on social media. Brett McGurk, if our viewers don't know who that is, former Middle East special envoy in both the Obama and Biden administrations, he said this, that if anyone tells you they know where this is going, they don't know what they're talking about. And I think it's safe to say most of our experts throughout the course of this evening have maintained that line. There's a lot of unknowns, aren't there?
There's a tremendous amount. Look, Brett's a colleague of mine at the Atlantic Council now.
That's why I brought it up.
I completely agree with Brett here, 100%. I think anybody that tells you they know where this is going is either lying or just naive, frankly. The reality is there's multiple pathways that this could go. Iran really has two big choices to make about how it's going to respond in the short term, and then whether or not it's going to try again for some reason to get a nuclear weapon and a nuclear program going. Those two things are really going to define the future here. But in the immediate, nobody really knows. We're all, frankly, waiting and waiting nervously. But I also think, look, the Trump administration has clearly put in a lot of thought militarily in terms of options. It moved U.S. assets into the region to try to protect against a big Iranian response or even a small one, and we'll see if it's successful defensively. It's tried hard to engage in some diplomatic efforts. I think there'll be questions about whether it tried enough over the last few days. There's been some criticism that, look, it had more days to go in President Trump's 14-day timeline. Others will say, no, look, the Iranians simply didn't respond. So what was there to engage? There's a lot more to come out of this to try to look back and see, was this right or was this wrong? Nobody knows that quite yet.
I mean, if you're the Iranian foreign minister and you've been meeting with Steve Witkoff for the last 6 weekends in Europe and also in Oman, was that all charade? Could they have made a deal knowing what just transpired tonight? Are they, the Iranians, kicking themselves for not having made a deal after what happened tonight? I mean, why wouldn't they be?
You know, I think there's a mix. Iran is not monolithic in its thinking. You do have a number of folks, including Arachi, the Iranian foreign minister, who was the prime interlocutor with Steve Witkoff, who I think, yes, probably would have preferred to have made a deal and wish that they could have gotten one sooner. I think at the same time, you probably have hardliners who are skeptical and not particularly ever interested in making a deal in Iran. I think it's a mix, but certainly today, I think the question is going to be, is there really room for diplomacy as the president had put back on the table? And it won't be diplomacy over a nuclear program as much as it will be diplomacy to end the war as it stands now and to move forward into, frankly, a very changed region.
I mean, clearly, these regimes, they're described by many as rogue regimes like Iran is. They don't go down without a fight, especially when it's a burgeoning nuclear weapons program that they want to hold at all costs. So is it naive to think that they will ever give it up?
Well, I think the question is going to be, what is there to give up? In other words, if the U.S. was successful in destroying Fordo and destroying Natanz and destroying what remained of Esfahan, the latter two really started by Israeli destruction about a little over a week ago, then it in some ways ironically makes it a little easier for Iran to negotiate because there isn't anything to frankly give up anymore. You can talk about a right to enrichment either way. But if you've now been set back, that you don't have the centrifuges available, if you're not spinning in the cascades, then it in some ways makes it easier. I think you're always going to have some level of hardliners who say, we want to rebuild. This is fundamental to our identity. We've gone on saying for years, this is critical. We're going to have to kind of wait and see, I think, ultimately what the totality of the result was from the strikes. But it's going to have a big impact, therefore, on what diplomatic course of action is actually possible.
All right, we have the map up here. We also, I think, just got this live picture as the sun now up on a Sunday morning there in Jerusalem. You can see there the Dome of the Rock in the distance. If you could, what is the, I guess, overall global reaction going to be to this? Let's take the US and Israel and Iran out of it for now. What's Europe going to say? What's Saudi Arabia going to say? What's China going to say? What's Russia going to say? I just read out what the UN is saying. They are condemning this, Guterres, the Secretary General. What about all of them, Jonathan?
I think it's going to be mixed. Look, I don't think you're going to get anybody that publicly meaningfully endorses it. I think German Chancellor Merz was probably closest in terms of supporting Israel in comments that he made a couple of days ago regarding how the Iranian nuclear program has been an existential threat to Israel. I expect European allies, the E3, France, Germany, and the UK, to be quite tempered in their responses. But I also think that there's a slight difference. Certainly, you're going to get public condemnation, for instance, from many of the Gulf states who are terrified that the retaliation is going to come against them. But I think privately, the messaging is going to be a little bit different. You're probably going to get a number of the Gulf states, the Emiratis, for instance, probably the Saudis, who are quite happy about the fact that the U.S. has taken out Iran's nuclear program. You're going to get some in Europe who believe, look, this was actually the right thing to do. And I think it sends a different message as well to a number of Asian allies who have been questioning, look, in the event of China's move on Taiwan, in the event of real hostilities, will the U.S. be there and be supportive? And this might give them some belief that, oh, actually, look, the U.S. isn't just retreating from the world when really there's a challenge, when there's real concern over something existential, the U.S. will support its greatest allies. For Russia, it has to be a huge concern because it's just another ally in the region.
Yeah, how many people involved in this?
Really seen diminished. We've seen them really take a loss in terms of Syria, the investment they've made. Iran has been a big ally. And for China, the real concern is the Strait of Hormuz. Does it remain open so that oil can continue to ship? If it closes, then the Chinese are going to be privately just as upset as I'm sure they are publicly right now.
Okay, let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know if you can see it in this map. You can see it in the map. Does Iran have a unilateral power to shut that strait off to shipping? And if they do, could that be an arrow in their retaliatory quiver?
So I think it is an arrow. They can shut it off. They can blockade it. The question is for how long? In other words, you have about a fifth of all global oil goes through the straits, about a quarter of LNG, of liquefied natural gas, goes through the straits. That's going to have an impact on the entirety of the world. And the Iranians will face, obviously, significant pressure to reopen it. And the question is, look, will you see kinetic strikes be taken by the U.S. or by allies to force it to be reopened? I also think it's a challenge for Iran, because if Iran closes it, then it's going to be impacting actually one of the few, I won't say friends, but one of the few allies it has in China. China's incredibly,
Oh,
I
dog.
won't say dependent, but significantly uses what is a illicit black market Iranian oil and needs it for their own economic growth, their own economic viability. And so if you close it, you're going to see prices skyrocket around the world on both oil and natural gas. And so it's a bit of a double-edged sword for the Iranians. They can do it, but it comes with risks themselves for them doing it, especially over a medium or long-term period.
And Jonathan, just lastly, I like to take the 30,000-foot view sometimes for the last question here. Was this all inevitable, kind of the arc of history going toward this tonight, that the U.S. would eventually and inevitably have to do this? Elections obviously have consequences. President Trump was ushered back into the White House last November. And now he has said all along, he said on the campaign trail, Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. He had the door open for 60 days for diplomacy. And then that door was shut, and he decided ultimately to take military action here. Let's go all the way back to the Obama administration, the JCPOA. Trump, first term, he pulls out of that. That was the Iran nuclear deal at the time. I've been asking some guests, hindsight is 2020. If we were still in that deal right now, would we be here tonight?
Uh-oh.
Look, I don't think it was inevitable that we got here through any part of this. Okay. Leaders make decisions, and the idea that somehow it's just a system that's running it, I think both President Trump and even President Obama have very much that that's not true by the decisions that they themselves make that can change the arc of history. I think that the JCPOA, for all of the many flaws that it had significant ones, was actually doing the job. Iran was set back significantly. And so I don't know that you would have been here tonight anyways if President Trump had not put out in his first term. He made the decision to do so. President Biden, I thought rightly, didn't just jump back into it, to his credit. And then look, the 60 days expired, but I have to be honest, it's not clear to me that the Iranians knew that that timeline was even still a fundamental one in place when the Israelis struck, right? I think they saw, as you said, there had been 5 rounds of negotiations. We were preparing for the 6th. I think it really took them by surprise that the Israelis were willing to go that far. And so I think, again, history is dependent on the decisions leaders make. We saw another one tonight. Where it ultimately leads, I think, is yet to be written.
Yeah, I mean, some of the critics of these actions, and including the Israeli actions, are kind of calling this adventurism, or another foreign entanglement the U.S. is getting involved with. You hear the term forever war. You also hear the term nation building, kind of all of those terms from a bygone era at the outset of the Iraq War in 2003. And that's kind of rearing its head tonight. And so I thought that was quite interesting. But there are a lot of U.S. assets in the Middle East, military personnel, a lot of American citizens as well. Is it right to be concerned about their safety tonight?
Of course, 100%.
We'll
Look,
talk about that in a
I think
minute.
the Iranians are going to retaliate one way or the other. The question of whether this escalates significantly is about how narrow that retaliation is, or whether they widen it out and make it as intense as possible. At the end of the day, I think the Iranians have that choice to make. But either way, you have significant U.S. forces in Iraq, significant U.S. forces out at Al Udeid in Qatar, and significant forces at Navcent in Bahrain, in Manama. That's not to say anything of the many forces that have now flowed into the region as the Pentagon and the White House, of course, have set up the potential to have to defend those already in region. And so you've got more naval assets and more personnel that have now flowed in. They are at risk. I think the U.S. evacuations from many of their embassies and many other installations made sense when it happened to happen right before Israeli strikes. Now I think we're going to see it probably pay off because it lowers the risk for non-essential personnel, but there's a lot of soldiers and a lot of forces that will still be at risk.
All right, Jonathan Panikoff there with the Atlantic Council. I know it's late, Jonathan. Can't thank you enough. I'm sure we'll be speaking very, very soon. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, we're going to keep it going. We're a little past the bottom of the hour. It's now 8:35 on the West Coast, 11:35 now in Washington there. And I want to put this up from the Associated Press. Take a look at this. So we're hearing yet again from Iran. They say there are no signs of contamination after U.S. airstrikes targeted nuclear facilities at Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz. Now, remember, that was a key question I was asking some of our experts. If you're bombing all of these nuclear sites like the United States did tonight, won't there be some type of radioactive fallout in the air, on the ground, to the civilian population? You see there, Iran says this: no signs of contamination. Now, in the meantime, I want to show you yet again live picture there at the White House. If we could put up that tweet from Jennifer Griffin. Just want to preview this. Remember, we are anticipating.
So I want to play a video that I just dug up on TikTok. Bear with me. Let's see what this is. Someone from Iran is talking about this particular strike. So let's hear from somebody that's over there.
من هدف مشروع ایران هستند. آمریکا با این اقدامی که انجام داد علیه ایران و حریم هوایی ایران را شکست و جنایت علیه ایران انجام داد دیگه جایی در منطقه غرب آسیا نداره. آقای رئیس جمهور آمریکا، شما شروع کردید و ما تمومش خواهیم کرد.
Okay, I'm gonna play it again just in case you guys didn't see it. For those that might be just joining.
من هدف مشروع ایران هستند. آمریکا با این اقدامی که انجام داد علیه ایران و حریم هوایی ایران را شکست و جنایت علیه ایران انجام داد دیگه جایی در منطقه غرب آسیا نداره. آقای رئیس جمهور آمریکا، شما شروع کردید و ما تمومش خواهیم کرد.
All right, you guys saw that clip and basically saying, "Hey, Trump, you started it. We're gonna finish it." But you also heard the commentary from the desk over there at Fox News, and talking about all of the implications with the different countries involved, like I was speaking on before. So the Strait of Hormuz is the most strategic area where everybody has the most concern because it has a global economic impact if it were to be compromised in some kind of way. And the global impact of it is that it doesn't just hurt the United States or anything in the Western world. It also hurts their alliance with the people that are part of BRICS. They haven't mentioned BRICS, or BRICS Plus rather, but nobody wins in that situation. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Iran chooses to respond, whether it be militarily, will it be something that's covert, something that's one-off, because they already financed proxy wars with Hamas. They already have a lot of negative history in the region in terms of foreign policy between Israel and Iraq in the past. But could it be a situation where enemy of my enemy is my friend? That's kind of what it looks like. And it's way too early to tell, but you see the imagery, you see the conversation is ongoing. There's a lot of moving pieces in this conversation about what will happen and what won't happen. But I would assume that they can't sit back and not respond. But how they respond is going to be something else. Do they hit something that's adjacent? Do they get back to shooting rockets? What's next? What is next? I mean, there's also, like I said before, there is conversation surrounding from other political leaders involved in the U.S. that there was an ongoing list of countries that Israel wanted to basically take off the map. And so I'm gonna play this video so you can see what I'm talking about.
War with Iraq. I said, we're going to war with Iraq. Why? He said, I don't know. I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al Qaeda? He said, no. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. We don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments. I came back to see him a few weeks later. By that time, we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He picked up a piece of paper and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. I said, is it classified? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, you remember that? He said, sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you.
There's a lot of conflict associated with everything that we're watching right now, you know. So that's some of the background stuff that's ongoing. I like to talk about the history of how we got here, because a lot of times we don't have the context, and you're not going to get all of that from you're not going to get that directly from the media. They're not going to educate you on past events. They'll bring it up slightly in context, but this stuff is very important to understand from a historical point of view. So I'm gonna let me see what else I got. I did a little bit of digging on where to get some of this information and to kind of like bring some sort of conversation to an understanding of how long this conflict has been ongoing. Not that it's anything new, but we have to always go back and say, hey, we need to look at this again. Now, I'm going to play something else from another content creator. Y'all know him as Myron Gaines from Fresh and Fit, but he does other content as well. So check this out.
That, quote, we now have plenty of money. Our new backers are Jews. As soon as we or they take care of Kennedy. Do you guys see why they didn't want to classify this shit? Do you guys see now why? For everyone that said I was a conspiracy theorist or paranoid or whatever, do you guys see now? Am I not fucking vindicated and everybody else at this point? I remember getting into fucking arguments with normies on Twitter Spaces, telling them that they're idiots, telling them that the reason why you guys haven't seen the files was because of this shit. But look, it's right there. Hey, man. I hate to say that I'm right again, but I'm right again.
See what else we got going on. Somebody else is up here talking.
But my hope is, yes, as I think President Trump said, he created MAGA. So he'll declare what that means. And peace cannot involve, and you can't have peace if you're going to have a nuclear Iran. And I hope people, those in his base that have opposed this strike will heed what the president said, because I think he's completely right. This was an America first strike.
All right, Michael Makovsky there with Jinsa. Michael, thanks for being with us. I know it's late. We'll definitely be speaking soon.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Have a good night.
In the meantime here, speaking of Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu, I want to just show you this, if you haven't seen it just yet, a video posted about a couple of hours ago, Netanyahu thanking President Trump for what he did tonight. Let's watch this.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
All right, that was the message there from Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu. It was reported that the Trump administration, President Trump himself, spoke on the phone with Netanyahu, indicating that the U.S. gave a heads up to the Israelis that this was taking place. That's been reported here. In the meantime, though, more conversations, more analysis, especially from our friends and colleagues at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. They've been so instrumental in helping us here at Live Now explain what is an extremely complex conflict, especially after tonight. And that's, of course, their executive director, Jonathan Schanzer. He joins me. Jonathan, good to see you here. I know you're extremely busy. I guess simplistically, I got to ask this. So what now? What next? Do we know?
Well, I think we're going to get a BDA tomorrow, a battle damage assessment. We're going to get that probably 8 o'clock in the morning. I understand that's what Donald Trump said in his speech, that short speech that he gave, indicating that the Pentagon will do the technical work, right? They're listening right now to the communications of the Iran.
Yep.
They're trying to get pictures if there were cameras inside the Fordo facility that was destroyed, as well as the other two. They want to just get a sense of how much was actually destroyed, whether there's anything left of the nuclear program. There are, of course, questions about the nuclear material, specifically at the Isfahan facility. There is, I think, still a desire to try to remove that if it's possible, although it may be that the U.S. has damaged it so much that it's now entombed, if you will, in whatever is left of that facility. But really, I think when you talk about now what, I think the question is, number one, will the regime capitulate? Will it surrender? And my understanding is the Israelis may have even stopped their attacks for a time to give the Iranian regime an opportunity to weigh its options and to potentially say whatever the word is in Farsi for uncle. That's what I think they're hoping they say, because they don't want to. They don't want to do this anymore.
Uncle in Farsi.
I think they've sustained a bunch of damage, but I do think that the regime seems defiant right now. I think we've already seen at least one drone fired out of Iran into Israeli airspace, and there's more coming. I think in the region, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, they're all very nervous about this. There is some talk, of course, about asymmetric attacks, sleeper cell attacks in the United States as well, if the regime in Iran has decided that it's going to fight to the bitter end. If it does, my sense is that it will not bode well for the regime. I don't think they'll come out stronger as a result. Seems like suicide to me, but I think these are the sorts of choices that right now are in front of the supreme leader who's had a very bad night.
So, Jonathan, when you say surrender, do you mean surrender the promulgation of a nuclear program? Do you mean surrender with regard to, striking targets inside Israel? Or does surrender mean the Ayatollah is no longer in charge? What does surrender mean? Or all of the above?
I think that's the big question. In other words, what is the regime willing to do? I think we could maybe start by saying that surrender means we give up our nuclear program, but that's kind of moot now, right? It's all been destroyed. There's nothing to give up. I mean, you could say I won't try to rebuild it, but it would take decades, I think. All the scientists are gone. The leadership of the program's gone. The facilities appear to be, destroyed. So there's not much there. I think the question then becomes the missiles that they've been firing at Israel and the missiles that they've been firing at ships in the Red Sea, the harassing of maritime traffic. Those are questions. And I think also just the continued funding of the proxies. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, militias in Iraq and Syria. Are the Iranians going to continue to fund those actors right now, or are they going to wave the white flag? But I will tell you that there is an open question here about, can you still be the Islamic Republic of Iran? Can you still be pursuing a revolution in the Middle East? Right? They call themselves a revolutionary regime. Can you do all of that while surrendering to your two biggest enemies, your most bitter foes, the United States and Israel. They have just delivered a beating to the Iranian regime. Does the Iranian regime even acknowledge that right now, knowing that if they do so, it may mean the end of what they are sort of in their essence?
Mhm.
And I think that's the big question we have to ask ourselves. It does look like the regime is unraveling. For me, it does not look like there's much of a future here, but they
Wow.
may try to hang on. If they do, I think they'll sort of look like the North Korean version, of a country in the Middle East.
Wow. So we were talking about the now what phase of that question with regard to the nuclear program. Let's talk about the
Pay
phase of the
attention to what he
question now
said.
what for U.S. involvement
And look
here.
at what's on the screen.
Because a lot of critics of this action tonight say it's going to spark a wider conflagration, escalate tensions, World War III. What do you respond to those critics who say that the United States, no matter President Trump saying this was a one and done unless Iran retaliates, that we're involved now. This is ours.
Well, we are involved, but I think for those that are warning that this is back to the future, that we're back to 2001 or 2002 Bush administration policies, I got to say I think that's a bit exaggerated, because I don't see us putting boots on the ground. I don't see us engaging in state building. I don't see those things where we're spending blood and treasure in the ways that I think the Bush administration pursued in those early years of the so-called war on terror. Now, it is possible that the United States gets struck with asymmetric attacks, sleeper cells in the United States, attacks against our allies that could potentially send oil spiking. We could see, asymmetric attacks against American servicemen in Europe or beyond. Certainly, I would expect the regime, if it's still intact, to try to be killing Israelis or Jews wherever they can find them worldwide, including in the United States. So I think those are all risks. But I think the question that I ask,
I guess they got an audio issue.
All right, I do think we lost Jonathan Shanzer's audio there. We do apologize. We're back there live at the White House. So that happens sometimes with some of our.
the Israelis destroyed 75% of the targets so far, and the United States has come in and hit 25%.
All right, Jonathan Shander, we lost you for a minute there. We still have you. We're going to take you for a couple more minutes here. So we know that there's going to be this press briefing at the Pentagon at 8 a.m. Eastern time. What are you looking to hear from Secretary Hegseth, from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs? What can that battle damage assessment look like this early on? What would you ask them if you were sitting there in the briefing?
Well, my understanding is that usually these things take about 24 hours. And so it's going to be early, right? We're going to be looking at an assessment that's going to be coming in, somewhere around 12 hours in. So it's probably going to be an interim assessment with follow-ups. I think that at the end of the day, what we're looking for is just, do we have high confidence that these nuclear facilities have been destroyed from within, that these massive ordnance penetrators, these MOPS, that they dug in, right? These weapons, they actually, they literally screw down into the earth. And then you have a secondary fuse that detonates. And so then you've got, as I understand it, a 5,000-pound bomb that detonates once it has dug into the earth.
And struggle streaming over there.
Did the whole thing implode? That's what it's probably an easier question to answer. But again, I'm going to be waiting for Pete Hegseth and for his generals to give us the assessment of what happened. It'll be an interim assessment, and then there'll probably be a follow-up maybe 12 hours later, where hopefully we'll get the full picture. I will say, by the way, that the Iranians, maybe somewhat predictably, have already come out and said, it was not damaged as much as the United States was saying, that, Donald Trump's speech was hyperbole, which of course is possible, but it's also quite possible that the regime is lying through its teeth, because that is what the Iranian regime has been known to do now for going on 5 decades.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how will we trust them with their statements, with what they tell us about the shape of the nuclear program. Trust but verify the messages coming out of the regime. Will anyone take them credibly to that point?
No, they won't. And I think, it reminds me a lot for those who can remember the Iraq War, the second Iraq War. They had a guy they called Baghdad Bob, who was the spokesperson for Saddam Hussein's regime. And as the regime was crumbling, he was out there saying that, this is the mighty Iraqi army and that no one's defeating them and the United States is a paper tiger. This strikes me as quite similar. But again, I want to see those battle damage assessments. I want to see what they see, or at least whatever the unclassified version of that is, because I've learned from wars past, you gotta let the experts weigh in. You don't jump to conclusions. Yep. You wait. I want to hear, by the way, what the FBI is talking about the threats to the homeland. I want to hear what the Israelis are saying about threats around the region. These things we're going to have to learn, I think, slowly over the next, let's say, half day, maybe even to the next week, about what the threats are and whether there's additional work that needs to be done.
All right, Jonathan Schanzer there. I can't thank you enough. I know you're extremely busy tonight tracking all of this down. You're a great resource online and social media as well. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, we are fastly approaching the top of a new hour. Almost 9 o'clock here on the West Coast, almost midnight there on the East Coast in Washington. So we do have more news to get to. Reading from the Associated Press right now here, they report this, that the United States is stepping up evacuation flights for American citizens from Israel to Europe and continuing to draw down its staff at diplomatic missions in Iraq amid fears of Iranian retaliation as U.S. interests in the Middle East grow. So we do have these live pictures there in and over Jerusalem. You can see there the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, the Gold Dome there. Also, yet another vantage point in Jerusalem. So the Associated Press has it as follows, that even before those airstrikes were announced by the president on Saturday night in Washington, that the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem announced the start of evacuation flights for American civilians from Israel. So it's almost 7 in the morning there on a very early Sunday morning. 67 American citizens left Israel on 2 government flights bound for Athens on Saturday, and 4 more evacuation flights to Athens were planned for Sunday. That's according to an internal State Department document seen by the Associated Press. In addition to the flights, a cruise ship carrying more than 1,000 American citizens, including several hundred Jewish youngsters who'd been visiting Israel on an organized tour that's known as the Birthright Program, they arrived in Cyprus, according to that very same document. So we have live pictures there. To Jonathan Schanzer's point and Michael Makovsky's point, it does look like Israel has, for the time being, paused some of their own kinetic strikes on targets inside Iran, at least for now. So, like I said, when we do approach the top of the hour in about a minute and a half here, we're going to be replaying for you the statement from President Trump. He was flanked by his vice president, by his secretary of state, and by his secretary of defense. And then, of course, we're going to be diving into even more expert analysis and commentary. Remember, we're relying so heavily on the Foundation for Defensive Democracies. More analysts on the deck for that. And then we're going to be getting congressional response, a lot of varied responses, some lauding and really touting this move by the president, others saying it was blatantly unconstitutional. Also, some saying that President Trump should be impeached for it. We'll break down all of those reactions. Some Democrats, especially like Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries in the House, saying that the president needed congressional authorization to do what he did tonight. Of course, he didn't get it. And we'll be breaking down some of those key questions on Capitol Hill in just a moment here. So I want to thank all of you for being with us. It's been a very, very busy night. We're catching our breath here as we go into yet a new hour. And we're at that hour here, 9 o'clock on the West Coast, midnight there on the East Coast. I'm Andrew Kraft. This was the message from President Trump tonight, announcing the United States for the very first time struck targets inside Iran at 3 nuclear facilities. Let's watch.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, a lot of people that may have just gotten here, I'm going to get ready to end the stream in a minute, but I want to play a video that gives more historical context to what's actually taking place here, because I actually got a couple of videos, but I'm going to give one that gives a very, very concise understanding of how entrenched we are politically and militarily with Israel. Because a lot of people are asking questions. They're like, how come we're always in these conflicts as a country in a region that has nothing to do with us?
Building of a headquarters of APAC.
But this is very deep. By deep, I mean we don't, things that are deep, we just don't understand the nuance of it and how we got this far. But I want to play a video that kind of hopefully will shed some kind of context on what's going on here. And this is going to go back to an interview from Mike Wallace in 60 Minutes in 1988. I played it the other night when I was on live with my boy Cavi. Shout out to Cavi. And to kind of give you guys some historical background about it. So without further ado, I'm going to play it.
The American-Israel Public Affairs Committee. They would not let us photograph inside their headquarters. AIPAC says it is the spearhead for support for Israel here in Washington. It is not a political action committee. It does not make campaign contributions. But the clout of AIPAC here on Capitol Hill is legendary.
Practically every congressman and senator says his prayers to the AIPAC lobby. No, they've done an enormous job of corrupting the American democratic process.
George Ball was number 2 in the State Department under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, and he has never been reluctant to criticize the pro-Israel lobby.
It's the most effective lobby in the United States today, and I would put that ahead of the National Rifle Association.
What's wrong with picking a candidate to support on the basis of the way that he is voted? Isn't that the American way?
I think it's a caricature of the American way.
The word power, when it's used for AIPAC, is a myth. It's baloney. AIPAC is powerful only because the American people are behind Israel.
Rabbi Israel Miller is the vice president of AIPAC. AIPAC is not anti-Chafee.
No, AIPAC has put on the public record his votes on some of the issues that concern us, but we deal with a very politically aware and sophisticated group of people, the pro-Israel community, and they make up their own minds. You know, if we were
You
to
don't
tell
direct them?
We do not direct them.
Let me read to you a memo, an AIPAC memo, November 3rd, 1987. Senate race. Lieutenant Governor Richard Leach, Democrat, Rhode Island, is running against incumbent Senator John Chafee, Republican. Leach, who is Jewish, has a very good chance. Our problem is that the pro-Israel community is not excited and as forthcoming as they should be. We need to put the word out on this race, emphasizing Chafee's poor record. The focus should be to generate interest for a terrific candidate to replace a poor supporter of our issue. See attached voting record and Marty's analysis. It's an AIPAC memo.
Who signed it? I don't recognize it as an AIPAC memo.
Rabbi Miller continued.
In this case, I think all that was being said was that Leach has a chance against an incumbent senator.
Who has a poor record. And we got to get the word out.
His record is not as poor as some other senators.
Shortly after that interview, AIPAC confirmed that the memo was in fact written by a former AIPAC political staffer. But they insisted she was a low-level employee and that her memo did not reflect AIPAC policy. And that's important for AIPAC because under U.S. federal election regulations, if it were shown that pro-Israel PACs were working in conjunction with AIPAC or were coordinated by AIPAC, that would arguably be a violation of the law. Well, shortly before this broadcast, 60 Minutes received in the mail from an anonymous sender another memo written by a high-level AIPAC official, Liz Schreier, in which she urged a colleague to make certain that several pro-Israel PACs around the country funnel cash contributions to a handful of senatorial candidates. AIPAC officials acknowledged to us the memo was indeed an AIPAC document, but they declined to answer any questions about it. They said in a statement that despite appearances to the contrary, AIPAC does not have the power to direct fundraising decisions. Now, who are other senatorial candidates in current races with what pro-Israel PACs call poor records on Israel? Well, for instance, this year, many pro-Israel PACs are trying to defeat incumbent Senator Chick Hecht of Nevada, even though he is Jewish, because he too did not follow the AIPAC line on weapon sales to the Arabs. And there are many who charge that AIPAC, with its sights set only on Israel, is just too demanding of U.S. politicians.
We aren't demanding of U.S. politicians. We have a concern about Israel, which is understandable, particularly in this generation. Had you and I been in certain parts of Europe, we would have walked to Auschwitz together. We're very sensitive about the security, about the future of Israel, and support of Israel means that we feel that it is in the interest not merely of Israel, but also in the interest of the United States. Israel is a strategic ally of the United States.
In recent years, AIPAC and the pro-Israel PACs have helped defeat, among others, Congressman Paul Findlay and Pete McCloskey, Senators Harrison Schmitt of New Mexico, Walter Huddleston of Kentucky, and Chuck Percy of Illinois. Like Senator Chafee, Percy too came out in favor of that sale of AWACS to the Saudis.
I finally reached the stage where, as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, I saw our foreign policy totally turned around. With a Muslim world, 800 million people looking askance at the United States of America, what is happening? Who is running the foreign policy? Can Israel and the Prime Minister have more power than the entire Senate of the United States or the President of the United States? And that, to me, I simply said, enough is enough.
That particular AWACS sale to Saudi Arabia did manage to pass the Congress. And in 1984, pro-Israel PACs and other individuals spent millions to unseat the powerful Senator Percy.
Let me just quote to you the words of the executive director of AIPAC, Tom Dyer. After the defeat of Chuck Percy a few years back, he said to a Jewish group in Toronto, quote, "All the Jews in America from coast to coast gathered to oust Percy. And the American politicians, those who hold public positions now, and those who aspire, got the message."
It was an unfelicitous expression of that which Tom felt in his enthusiasm and in his zeal. I think if he had it to say all over again, he would have put it altogether differently.
Rabbi Miller, about a year ago, the New York Times wrote, "AIPAC has become a major force in shaping U.S. policy in the Middle East. Organization has gained the power to influence the presidential candidate's choice of staff, to block practically any arms."
I'm gonna pause right there because I'm gonna pull this back on stage. Because they're getting some reactions from the Democratic side of things.
Escalation. I believe we also have a message coming from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democrat from New York. She says this: the president's disastrous decision to bomb Iran without authorization is a grave violation of the Constitution and congressional war powers. He has impulsively risked launching a war that may ensnare us for generations. She says it is absolutely and clearly grounds for impeachment. So AOC going so far saying this is grounds for impeachment. So this is what we do here on Live Now. We give you all of the reaction from both sides of the aisle. We pull no punches here, neither fear nor favor. We show you what Democrats are saying. We also show you what Republicans are saying. Let's put up some Republicans here. Okay, so we'll get to some of the Republican reaction in just a moment here. We do have more analysis, more context coming in, including from our friend there at the FDD, Joe Truzman. He joins me. Joe, thanks for hopping on. I know it's extremely late where you are, but this is a momentous, historic occasion, and we got to get to it. Your initial reaction, you and I were talking earlier this week about the kind of what ifs, the hypotheticals, if this were to take place. It has now taken place here. What are you hearing?
Right. Historic moment for sure. Nevertheless, it happened a little sooner than I thought it would, but it happened. But now, more than anything, my concern is Iran's reaction and how it will respond. But of course, not only how Iran will respond. I think we talked about this last time you and I spoke. But their proxies, their network of clients in the region, they've been mostly quiet since the Israel-Iran conflict started about 8-9 days ago now. So we need to see, or need to observe, or I'm trying to find out at least. I'm curious to know what's going to happen on that front, right? Because you have Iraqi militia groups, you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, of course, and there are other groups. So there's a few of them in the region. Some battered more than others, we know that, but still potent. And it caused a lot of problems, not only for Israel, of course, but U.S. bases in the region, and of course, American allies in the region too. So now we're just in a wait and see mode, see what happens.
Yeah, and I think anyone saying they know it's going to happen does not know what's going to happen here. But as far as U.S. involvement is concerned, is that it, do you think, or will there be more?
I think a lot depends on Iran's response. That's what I think hinges. We, at least from reports over the last, let's say, 48 hours or so, I've observed a lot of messaging or reports actually that just say that show that the United States is moving a lot of assets into the region. All right, the amount of military assets that were moved by the United States into the region is not needed for the bombing that occurred tonight. I think what's happening there is the United States is prepared for a response. All right, they want to have the assets in place in case they have to go back into Iran or perhaps into other countries, maybe Iraq, for example, if Iraqi militias begin to attack U.S. bases. So they want to have those assets there just in case. Hopefully, they don't have to use them, of course, right? But these militias, these groups, Iran and others, they have said they're going to respond if the U.S. intervened in the war, and the U.S. did. So now it's their turn.
Yeah, the kind of fundamental thinking after Israel took out Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, in Tehran last summer, and kind of the blunt force reaction, Iran retaliated against Israel 2 times last year. Many had characterized Iran as a paper tiger, that it's all bark, no bite. And you even heard that over the last week as kind of the number of missiles they've launched into Israel has dwindled here. So is it safe to say that they won't retaliate based on the threats President Trump is giving and offering, the saber rattling from the White House, that any retaliation by Iran will be met with this amount of force, if not stronger force than what we just used? So is Iran in this now weakened posture, weakened state? Should they crawl into a hole?
I think they are in a weakened state, for sure. I think the Israelis did a lot of damage over the last 8-9 days against their military infrastructure, of course, their nuclear sites. But I don't think we have seen the worst out of the Iranians, all right? This includes their proxies and clients. So I think the biggest problem, at least for the Israelis, for example, is the missile interceptors they've been using. They've had to use up over the last 8-9 days now. Let's say Iran decides, with their remaining missile launchers, they decide to begin launching barrages against Israel that lasts days and days and days. The Israelis will eventually lose interceptors, will run out of interceptors. And that's a big problem. What if the proxies join in? Then there's more missiles coming. How does Israel defend their skies without interceptors? So there could be a lot of damage that could be caused here if this war drags on. Of course, you have the problem with the United States, too. They have military bases. They have allies in the region. They can be attacked, too. So I understand the paper tiger. Some people calling it Iran a paper tiger, but I'm more conservative. I think there's a lot more that they can do. Okay. They have tricks up their sleeves, essentially, and they're also known for acts of terrorism too. They don't have to retaliate only via missiles or only via drones. They have supported proxies that have carried out acts of terrorism against soft targets, against embassies, against Jewish targets, Israeli targets, American targets, obviously. So that's another big concern of mine, is terrorism.
No, mine too. And I was going to ask you that. And I don't want to be alarmist by any means. I don't want to be hyperbolic here, but I think, I speak for a lot of viewers right now. This is, a scary moment in world history, American history. We just don't know. It's very uncertain. But if someone has in the back of their mind right now, if they're watching, the thought that, Iran will do something on U.S. soil in the homeland, are they right to think that? Are they right to be concerned about that?
I think they have a right to be concerned, because the problem is Iran has demonstrated that they're willing to do this. All right, or its proxies have the capability to do this. That's the problem here in the homeland, here in the United States, and that does concern me. Can I give you a percentage if that's going to happen? I can't, but. Iran has many tools at its disposal. That's the issue here. Yeah. So that's one of the things, one of the possibilities that can happen. I'm not saying just here in the homeland, of course. There could be acts of terrorism in other countries as well, where they're American targets, or whether it's Israeli or Jewish targets. So again, that's a concern of mine. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. Listen, the Iranians and the Iranian government and their proxies have been known to play the long game. So they've waited months to carry out attacks or retaliations when it comes to employing acts of terrorism, like bombings, for example. Right. So there's so much to consider here. It's very difficult, but at least I think people should know that this doesn't mean Iran can attack in different ways. It doesn't have to be just missiles and drones. What we usually see, the conventional means, what we usually see on television.
All right, Joe Truzen, we're going to leave it at that. I know it's so late, and we thank you so much for coming on and helping us make sense of what is an extremely complex conflict that is still fluid, still playing out. Joe, good to see you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, so we're not going to do any commercial.
To an Arab country and to serve as a catalyst for intimate military relations between the Pentagon and the Israel army. How did AIPAC become so powerful?
Again, I'll say that that's very flattering, but it's a myth. It's just not so. The American people support Israel, and therefore Congress votes as it does.
One of Israel's staunchest supporters is Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, who says that AIPAC has nothing to do with his feelings about Israel.
If I can help Israel help herself in every instance, I do so. I'm also convinced it's in our national interest. I've yet to see any country in that part of the world that is as reliable as far as our strategic requirements are concerned as Israel is.
I don't believe it's an ally at all. We have no alliance with it. I mean, they insist on total freedom of action, and they insist on our subsidizing their total freedom of action.
The amount of that subsidy is remarkable and a testament to AIPAC's clout on Capitol Hill. Altogether, Israel gets more than $3 billion a year in assistance from the United States.
Sometimes the votes go through without a single debate involving billions of dollars. You couldn't spend that kind of money in this country without a huge debate going on. But a foreign government gets this money without debate because simply it's just organized to get it.
Why does Israel get more aid, more U.S. aid, than any other country in the world? $700 per Israeli per year, as opposed to $50 per Egyptian per year, as opposed to $2 per African per year.
None of this money goes for the $700, goes to raise the living standard of Israeli people. This is for their defense. This is for the security of Israel. If Israel were destabilized, the Arabs, with all of their petrodollars and with all of their weapons, would just sweep Israel into the sea.
Is there a possibility of a backlash if Israel is perceived as too powerful in the halls of government here in Washington?
There's always this possibility if people begin to believe that little Israel is calling the shots. And I'm certain Americans would resent that. They won't want any country, big or small, to be calling the shots in the Congress of the United States. But I don't think that AIPAC is calling the shots as far as I'm concerned.
Is it common sense or cowardice on the part of senators who just don't want to talk about this?
Oh, I would say the senators would say it's just being practical.
This past week, 3 major Jewish organizations took issue with AIPAC. The leaders of the American Jewish Committee, the American Jewish Congress, and the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith asserted in a letter to the president of AIPAC that AIPAC does not speak by the consensus of the organized Jewish community. And in a CBS News poll of 1,530 American adults 2 weeks ago, we asked, do you think that in order to preserve the security of Israel, the U.S. should give Israel more aid than it gives any other country? 13% said yes, 72% said no, 15% said they don't know.
So, you guys heard a bit of history right there. And I'm going to end the stream right here and wait for more information because right now you just got a lot of Twitter reactions and a lot of social media posts. So, what we've seen, to recap, is there was missile strikes from the U.S. into Iran targeting nuclear facilities and nuclear assets. The fallout from Iran is yet to be determined. They're going to get a battle damage assessment at 8 o'clock in the morning. We're going to give a briefing on it, rather. And we're going to hear more as this situation unfolds. There are going to be more conversations surrounding like the follow-on threats. How does Iran respond? Will they pursue military action? Will they target military facilities in the region that are U.S. Centric? Who knows? This is very, very complicated, and how it gets addressed is going to determine a lot of different things in foreign policy, economics, and it's going to impact a lot of moving pieces, man. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. I thought it was very important, and this has been another episode of Beyond the Algorithm, because there's what happens online and there's what happens in reality. I'm out.